and welcome to another YHM podcast. Today, Gary Carter is joining us.
Hello.
Yep.
How's that?
Yep, that's moving.
Is that moving?
Oh, yeah, that's moving. So, Gary, you've done a lot of work in the dissection lab recently. How has this informed your approach to yoga?
What's happened really with being in the lab is every time I've kind of gone into a lab, the first time I went in, I just thought I knew what I was doing. So it's my very first ever dissection. It was in Vienna, probably, I don't know, about 10 years ago, something like that. And I thought I could be clever with it, and I created an anatomical leg and then showed the guy that was running it the leg. And I was quite happy with what I'd done. He said, well, yeah, that just shows me, you know where the anatomy is now. Let your hands do the work and feel what's going on there, and don't try and carve it up and make it what you see in the books. So I just sat back and thought, oh, I actually know nothing right now. You know, where do I start? Everything I could have learned from a book and all my years of looking at anatomy and studying it just literally crumbled in front of me and dissolved. And I started to work differently. And it took me about a day. I was just watching everyone do their work. And with this back of my head feeling that I'm just going to go home. And then something came up. I saw something. I think it was just the shape of a structure. And what came to mind was Van der Scaravelli's words, really, which is going with the body and not against it. And when I saw that, and this is something I've had a feeling for, I think if we have some kind of kinesthetic practice one way or another, we're going to get that feeling. But I saw it in shape and structure, and I thought, if I go against any of those shapes, I'm going to start working against myself. So there's going to be an edge that will hurt. I'll have to force myself a certain way. It's something that Vanda said to me when I met her. She said, you must never force your body. And, I just said to her, well, why not? And she said, well, you hurt yourself, of course. And that was it. So, this was just whirling around my head every single time I was working, and I just let my hands do the feeling, really, when it came to the dissection. So using a scalpel blade, really, is you're kind of using it like a paintbrush, in a way, rather than just cutting. That's what anatomy books will show you. There might be moments where that's got to happen, but it was more of a feeling-based thing, and all of a sudden I found shape. One of my projects, really, which has been ongoing ever since, really, for 10 years, is if I was a bone, what would my landscape look like from that perspective, rather than, the anatomy maps will always show you everything from the outside inwards. Is that what would it be like to look at it from that perspective outwards? So I was able to remove, lots of musculature and lay that out and look at it from the other side. So, it's like the inside out anatomy map. And by seeing that, the shapes that we would tend to see of, i.e. the front of a thigh, the back of the thigh when it's laid out flat looks completely different in its layout. So that's a whole other side to the movement map. All of it moves and feels. So that then, my hotel room, I was just exploring all sorts of different ways of moving, and how could I explore those particular shapes by feel. And it kind of just led me back to my practice all over again. And it was just an inside-out sense of it. As much as we feel from within anyway, it was just a very different quality. So it gave me places to park for a while. I might be practicing, and I'll park up for a bit and then explore what that feel might be like, and then move on again and go with it all over again. So yeah, that's where it's taken me.
So those insights that you've gained from being in the lab, how do you bring those across in your teaching?
Well, a lot of that, as you have seen as well in say the lectures that I might do, is lots of different angles of imagery that I might use as maybe a slideshow, but then we've got plastic skeletons and toys and stuff like that. So it's getting them hands-on that way, and then trying to give them more of a texture of what might be happening in tissue. So, they can get hands-on with each other as well. But it's not the anatomy that a lot of people think. The word anatomy it just puts it in a bracket straight away. So a lot of people say, oh, well, it's this thing, it's just basic anatomy. This is not that at all. This is more of an experiential embodiment of the thing that's called anatomy, but I don't know whether we can call it anatomy anymore, because anatomy means that which you cut up. That's basically, ana and tomi is to cut up. Exactly. So we're not doing that. We're trying to put it back together again. So recently, I've just been in the lab last week, and I've completed a project and found other structures again, and different interactions and connections, and they're endless, really. So, I've made it in the same way as a bicep's been made by a scalpel, and Tom Myers has made the anatomy trains by a scalpel. This has been made as well, but I've looked at it in a certain way and tried to put that back together, and it's about kind of connecting the anatomy up in a very different way and putting it back together as a felt sense once more. So I think there needs to be a different name for it. I don't know what I would call it, and whether it needs to be, I don't know. It's but the guys tend to they get a different sense of who they are, their shape, how do they move with their shapes, and you often find that as they start moving with their shapes, they might arrive in certain positions or gestures, or I don't like the word posture, gesture, and it might be relevant. That's like, oh look, I've just arrived in dog, or I've arrived in a seated forward bend, or I've arrived in pigeon or back bend. How did I get there? So the sequencing kind of takes care of itself, really. It's in the way that you might see a child move when they're first learning to get towards standing. That first year is a whole bunch of motion. And in fact, if we could be it's probably done, but interesting project to film a child going through that whole year. Because they don't get up and do a yoga practice or a little movement practice at, say, 11 o'clock in the morning and think, right, that's it, done for the hour, I'll do the same again tomorrow. It's just whenever they can all day long, it's repeated. So they're laying it down in their tissue, laying it down in their nervous system. And we will probably find that as they're going through that, they arrive in certain positions that we might call yoga postures. You see something that resembles dog, you see certain seated positions, they end up in cobbler, or they end up in a little cobra type of arrangement, and so on and so on and so on. That's purely because the way that we're shaped, we will land in those positions one way or another anyway. So we can't go against the grain. It would hurt. It would stop us. This inside us, the system's got this natural. It's like a little doorstop. It just stops the movement, and then we evolve around that and adapt to the movement and move in a slightly different direction. It's no different to what I've experienced, say, with Wing Chun. Yeah, with the martial arts. That's informed my practice an enormous amount.
Where do you see yoga going in terms of how it's taught? What do you see on the horizon? Is there any particular direction you'd like to take it? Do we even need another name for it these days?
No. I think what's happening right now is a very strange time in yoga. I think its origins are almost getting lost one way or another. And I don't know whether there's so much, let's say science. I mean, it puts me in that bracket as well, because there's me and a few others that have been involved in the world of, say, researching stuff like fascia, connective tissue, even from a long time ago. And of course, that's jumped everyone ahead into getting excitable about all of that stuff, and then trying to find new ways to do things. And we haven't seen a new way of movement yet. It hasn't appeared. I mention this a lot to my groups. Bruce Lee always said that the only way we're going to find a new way to move is to grow a new limb. So everything's been covered. It's just that they're becoming new names that's added to it. And I was just talking to someone today about this in terms of another movement practice, and I just said, rather than the workshops being new ideas and new this and new that, go back to the book that was written in the first place, look at the philosophy of where it came from, and that's where we start. Because we move so far away from that it almost loses its thread, it loses its essence. There's this sort of 8 limbs of yoga, this tree of yoga. What are those roots born in? And can we come back? The classic traditional postures have been around a lot longer than the stuff that we see nowadays. And they're tried and tested over thousands of years. We don't know who's died doing these practices, and yet what I see is some people trying to kill themselves getting into posture. So, I'll do this posture even if it kills me. I said, well, I don't think that's the process of the work. And people pushing themselves really hard into postures causing injuries. We live in a time now where we're seeing the highest percentage of injuries. Yeah. So I think really And we can look at, say, well, the stuff that Pete Blackaby talks about is the intelligent yoga. You know, I think that's an interesting notion to look at, is just being intelligent about the practice.
So intelligent as instinctive or intuitive, perhaps as self-preservation?
Self-preservation, or and intelligent not being that it's an intellectual process, you know, because we can intellectualize it a lot. It's the intelligence of our structure, of ourself, and also our relationship to gravity. Yeah, the body will work well with the ground if we let it. We don't see enough in the West of people letting themselves do that. You know, as a for instance, what we just saw in the lab last week, and there's all sorts of reasons why these things happen without going into the detail of that. But what we had seen is that the upper body and let's say the skin around the upper back was about 1 centimeter thick, and we can start to see that, you know, this can be potential of attempting to hold oneself up against the ground by using the neck and the shoulders to hold themselves up. You know, we've got a foot for that, so why don't we do that? You know, so if we arrange the structure well enough, arrange ourselves well enough within the field of gravity, everything else above can be light and easy. You know, that's not a yoga thing. That's been around forever. There's an understanding. It's there in all sorts of ancient systems. Yoga is just one of the ones that mentions it that way.
Thanks, Gary, for sharing your insights and experience with us here. If you want to catch more of Gary Carter, look out for this second part of this podcast. See you next time.